Everybody, this morning I'm responding to a question that came in about developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, lifelong, and dementia. And I've done some of these talks in the past, but it has been a little while, I found out. I thought it hadn't been that long ago, but geez, time passing. So this morning, I'm going to talk a little bit about why is this becoming something more and more people are starting to recognize and talk about? Because I've actually been talking about it for like 15 years. Because that's part of my background. I started off working with people with developmental disabilities, even as a teenager, a kid. And then I started working in different areas of healthcare, including aging, dementia, cognitive changes, head injury, and so my background is I got a lot of opportunities to learn about developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities. And now I know more about dementia. So here's what I want to say is that people living with lifelong differences, where their whole life or the vast majority of their life. So typically a developmental disability or an intellectual disability is identified as something that happens to you before the age of 6, although some systems use 14. But 6 is a pretty common age. So something happens genetically at your birth, prior to birth, after birth, something that happens within the very early window of living. And boom, you have something that is going to change how you live your life. There could be physiological manifestations, there could be physical manifestations, but typically there are also some cognitive or brain manifestations, behavioral manifestations. So these are things that make you different. They are things that make supporting and caring for you and how you develop, how you go from an infant baby or even in utero into full grown, how that happens for you will be different. And it'll be pretty different than what other people experience. I mean, we all experience our own uniqueness, but these are pretty unique. And so some of the categories of intellectual disability include things like things you have that are genetic, like Down or spina bifida or cerebral palsy. I mean, and these are things that happen at or before birth. You're born because of that's the genetic coding you have, or something happens at your birth, peri birth, during the birth, and like too much oxygen, and that's where often we think cerebral palsy. I mean, that's the latest thinking. So what that means is you have a different brain, and you have the development of a pattern in life that's going to make you different and make you stand out. We also have health conditions that can impact. So, for instance, if children's mothers have measles while the child's in utero, they can start developing differently after that. If moms don't get enough iron, if this happens, if that happens, all kinds of things can sort of cause this to start up. But what we notice is as you're developing your cognitive abilities, your behavioral sort of tendencies are different. And so let's take Down, for instance, because that's a common one. You get trisomy 21, 3 copies of a gene. When that happens, what we now know is you unfortunately get a copy of an Alzheimer's gene, an extra copy. And so it makes it super high risk that as you age, and classically you will prematurely age. One of the things about Down is it does tend to speed up the aging process. It also causes often congenital malformations like cardiac or breathing or problems with structural support. So really low muscle tone at birth, short, thick tongue in a smaller mouth. So it makes it harder to articulate and do things with your. So all your life, you've had some differences. Now, it used to be that often this was a situation where people would be institutionalized or removed from family or be considered, oh, not able. But that's actually not true. It turns out with the right support, with the right development, people have different abilities, even within the category of Down. What we do know, though, is there is a higher profile risk of developing dementia. And the primary dementia that we tend to look for is Alzheimer's. But unfortunately, there are other dementias that also need to be taken into consideration. So, for instance, if you've had a lot of falls and some head injuries, then we might be looking at frontal temporal or vascular dementia. If you have problems with diabetes, if you have problems with mobility, we could also look in for Lewy body. We might also look for frontal temp. And so this is where it's like, oh, so this population that we've worked so hard and so long, often families and support people, OTs, PTs, we're all working toward helping the child, that adolescent, that adult be independent. And now we know that for this population, there's a super high risk they're going to develop a dementia, which will result in them losing their independence and traveling back into a state where they will absolutely need support to live. So, what do we know? And I'm sticking with down right now, just because it's a specific category, but it's a high risk category. What do we know? And we know that the vast majority of people living with Down will experience some form of dementia if they live long enough. That risk goes up dramatically if they have family members that have had a dementia. And we also know that there are other risk factors that figure into this. And when we see that, what we know is that they will be younger when they show us first symptoms. So 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, up until very recently, it was actually very unusual for someone with Downs to live their full lifespan, which could be into the 60s, maybe early 70s, but it's very unusual for people with Down to live much longer than that. But what we know that somewhere is between the ages of 35 and 65, the number of people living with the dementia with Down syndrome, it's called a syndrome because there's a collection of symptoms, or it has been historically, those numbers increase dramatically. Somewhere estimates are around 70% of folks. Now, of those folks who are developing Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, typically we will see at least half the population develop it very rapidly. So the symptoms start, and boy, do they go. And so within 3, 4 years, the person is no longer with us or severely disabled. And the pattern of disability looks a little different. The pattern of symptoms look a little different because memory, recent and recall of detailed memory, has always been an issue. Some people are incredibly skillful, but most people live with Down. One of the things they have a hard time doing is acquiring and holding on to new knowledge. Once you establish a habit, a routine, a pattern, once they get something, boy, they're good at holding on to it, but getting it can be a bit of a challenge, getting it the pathways to form up and to get concrete. So we can also have patterns of behavior that are pretty familiar and habitual, and people do them really well. And so sometimes one of the first things we notice is their patterns are changing. They're not liking what they used to like. They're not doing what they used to do. They're not holding on to that. They're making mistakes, and they may or may not be aware of their mistakes. We may also see a change in sort of fatigue, exhaustion, not being able to do things as long. We may see more emotional outbursts. We may see people using words and language they've never used before and not being able to use language they used to. We might notice self-care abilities are sort of looking iffy, like not taking care of self, which tends to be something we would see more in the middle of dementia for people who don't have developmental disabilities and don't have Down. But in this case, we might be seeing it earlier. So that's sort of a quick snapshot. Now, some people living with Down and having a dementia, Alzheimer's, may go really slow. It may be a very slow, quiet sort of dementia, and that makes it harder to catch. What I would say is that this has only become sort of something that a lot of people are noticing and getting concerned about within the last 15 years, 10, 15 years, even 5 for many groups. All of a sudden, people are going, wow, I mean, we have a lot of people who have this condition and are developing a dementia. And it's sometimes very difficult to get the right kind of healthcare providers, to get the right kind of living situation, because here's the other reality. If I have Down syndrome and I am 40, it's very likely that my mom was over the age of 40 or around that time when she had me. So now she's 80. So one of the realities is older siblings, because it's not uncommon for there to be older siblings in a family with Down. There's always a possibility that it isn't the case. But all of a sudden, older siblings are facing the reality of not just one person in their family living with a dementia, but at least two: mom and their younger brother, mom and their younger sister. Now, this isn't just down, but I want to say that with down, wow, that can be a really hard transition because mom or dad or the couple have cared for this child, this adult, had this relationship for a long, long time. And if mom passes away or dad passes away, and I have my sibling who is now really struggling with the loss of the parent and living with their own brain changes, it can get sort of overwhelming. And it's not unusual for siblings to be caring for parent and sibling, or caring for sibling with parent no longer in the picture, and having to make some really hard choices and decisions about where, how, who. And if we haven't done a lot of thoughtful planning, and I'm not talking just estate planning, like really thinking about having a care plan moving forward, it's really easy for this to get into the overwhelming range pretty quick and trying to figure out what the heck, how are we going to do this? And for it to not necessarily go very well. So, what we're going to do in the next few sessions is talk a little bit more about, okay, so all of a sudden you're starting to notice something's happening. What can you do? We also will look and talk beyond down, but that's what I want to start with because it's actually the most common condition you can have that's a developmental disability and developing dementia, other than the juvenile dementias, where you are developing a dementia as part of your genetic coding. And it's something you do have, and you have it at birth, and you start actually developing your dementia very young. So, anyway, today is just sort of an introduction to the idea of, whoa, developmental disability, okay, and brain change that comes with dementia. Ooh, huh. What's going to happen here? What do we do that's similar? Are there things we should do that are different? Hope it was helpful. If you have questions, you have thoughts, you have ideas, you have experience, you want to share something, you want to ask something, check in with us. We do have some videos that we have done, but for right now, we're just going to have a little conversation. Till next time, take care of yourself, take care with your care, and look around. And if it's not you, maybe there's someone in your community that you might notice, because everybody could use a little support. Take care, all.